let's dig a little deeper and turn to Michael Becker. He's an assistant professor of international human rights law at Trinity College, Dublin. Michael, welcome to the program. I want to get to the Israeli reaction in a moment, but first, how significant is this report? How much weight does it carry? We should add this was an independent United Nations inquiry.
It's certainly significant in that this commission of inquiry has been operating actually since 2021. It was set up before the attacks of October 7th, 2023. It has, of course, looked very closely at everything that's happened since October 7th, 2023. And in previous reports, it had found that Israel was committing war crimes, crimes against humanity. This report is different in that it focuses in specifically on the question of whether Israel is in violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention. And of course, it has concluded that Israel is.
What do we know about the members of this panel?
Well, the panel is chaired by Navi Pillay, who is a former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She was the president of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. So she really has impeccable credentials in terms of international human rights law and indeed international criminal law, and she is joined by a former UN Special Rapporteur from India who's an expert in housing rights, and Christopher Sidoti, an Australian human rights lawyer who was, for example, one of the members of the UN fact-finding mission that investigated the situation in Myanmar relating to the Rohingya. So these are very experienced human rights lawyers who know their stuff.
So, Michael, how does the UN define genocide? Clearly, the evidence has to meet that legal threshold, right?
Right. So the definition comes from the 1948 Convention, and you essentially need to establish two different things. So you need to establish what we might call genocidal acts. So certain acts that could be genocidal if, and this is the second part, if they are carried out with genocidal intent. And that means an intent to physically destroy a specific population group in whole or in part. So in this report, the Commission has determined that 4 of the 5 possible categories of genocide exist here in Gaza, including, for example, killing members of the group, but also, and in some ways I thought this was the strongest part of the report, acts deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction. But you have to be able to show that those acts were undertaken with that genocidal intent. And here the Commission has done so based on 2 different types of evidence. So there's the direct evidence. These are these kinds of incendiary statements by Israeli officials, but also the indirect or circumstantial evidence, all the accumulation of evidence. From that, the Commission concluded that the only reasonable inference that can be drawn is one of genocidal intent, even if these acts are also being undertaken in the course of Israel fighting a war against Hamas.
So, as you've heard, I'm sure by now, Israel has angrily rejected this report, calling it fake, saying it had been authored by Hamas proxies. And the Commission called Israel's response rather predictable. And one of the members said Israeli leaders never engage with the evidence. Explain what that means. What are they talking about by saying Israeli leaders never engage with the evidence?
Well, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. This was a predictable response. Israel's strategy is to delegitimize the process, to delegitimize the Commission, to attack the personal credibility and impartiality of its members. The problem, and this is a problem of Israel's own making, although it's a strategy, they don't engage with the Commission. They've refused to cooperate with the Commission. The Commission was not allowed to operate within Israel or within the occupied Palestinian territory. And this gives Israel, puts Israel in the position of being able to claim that the Commission is operating on incomplete or false information. But Israel has a duty, in my view, to come forward and rebut those claims, to rebut those allegations, to respond to that evidence, and to explain in detail, in a forensic way, why the Commission is perhaps drawing the wrong conclusions or is misunderstanding certain information. If Israel refuses to engage in the process, they can hardly cry foul when the result comes out in a way that they don't like.
I think the Israelis would also, Michael, say, what about the atrocities committed by Hamas and other militant groups. What about that?
Well, the report makes the point that nothing about this report precludes the Commission from, in a future report, for example, considering whether the attacks of October 7th themselves should be treated as genocidal acts. That simply wasn't the focus of this report. Now, I actually agree that I think that the Commission could have done more in this report to specifically engage with or explain why, for example, the tactics that Hamas uses, human shields and so forth, why that doesn't somehow exonerate Israel or mean that Israel's tactics are acceptable across the board. I think that there's more that the Commission could have done to try to connect the dots from its previous findings about war crimes or deliberately targeting civilians, which is what it found, and that question of genocidal intent.
All right, we'll leave it there. Michael Becker, thank you, sir.